Okay, so I am Mike Battistella, your presenter for today, President of Solutions3, and I was an emerging leader 2015 here in New Jersey. So just kind of lay out, Laura Lee asked a couple simple questions, where you're from. We're going to ask a lot of questions today and hopefully get a lot more information, but the assumption I'm making with you being on the line is that you are either looking at potentially using an MSP, you are using an MSP, or you're in the process of evaluating, or you'd like to understand more and potentially make a transition. So I think this is going to be a good session for you. I know these roundtables tend to be a lot more talking and dialogue, so I'd still like to do that, but because of the nature of the topic, I think sticking with the slides is going to be good. Although I'm a little hesitant because I don't want to make this just a slide presentation and just have everybody, kind of sit and kind of go, stone over on me while, I'm going through slides. So ask questions, interrupt. Let's make it as much of a roundtable as we can, even though we're going through slides. So as I mentioned, Emerging Leader 2015, but what happened, an interesting happened. So for the last 30 plus years, Trish and I have really spent our time in the enterprise, both on the commercial and the federal space. So we're typically dealing with very large departments, agencies, or organizations. And it was really the Emerging Leaders program that turned us on to the small and medium-sized businesses. So since that, it was a very rewarding experience. And so we've stayed plugged in. So we've been leaders and coaches and mentors for other emerging leaders. We've gotten involved in Internet Marketing Week, which is a yearly event, and also found myself as an instructor for the SBDC here in New Jersey out of Rutgers, teaching cybersecurity, IT kind of classes, and becoming a counselor and consultant for a lot of the small businesses. And really do enjoy that because there's still relationship involved, and that's kind of the best I can give you. There's still relationship. And a lot of the enterprise accounts, it's just about closing the deal and getting as few points as many points off as possible and all that stuff. So anyway, and I do have, Trish and I both have quite a history with teaching for companies like Hewlett-Packard and a number of our other larger training partners. So we bring that to bear. So what even caused us to present this as a topic or feel that there was a real need for this as a topic? So if I could just take a couple of moments and set the table for you. We have been involved in not only IT management for a lot of our clients, but also cybersecurity. And as we all know, that cybersecurity right now is a really hot topic and an area that small businesses, medium-sized businesses really need to pay attention to and have a good understanding of. And what we've seen in doing these cybersecurity assessments is when we get to the portions of the assessment that involve the IT service provider, the kinds of services they're providing, the kind of access they have, and even vetting. A lot of times part of our security assessment is to vet the IT service provider. We're finding incredibly interesting and actually at times discouraging things. So it's really those experiences that we wanted to share with you and help you better select, enable, and manage your IT service provider, be it internally or externally. But what we're seeing is that a lot of the small, medium-sized businesses, the owners of those businesses really tend to underestimate the importance that IT plays in enabling their business. And what I mean by that is too often they don't want to spend the money for what's really needed. They want to get by with suboptimal tools. When I ask them, tell me a little bit about your IT service provider, I hear things like, well, it's my nephew, it's the kid down the street, it's my neighbor's son, it's a friend of a friend. And they're really entrusting a very important piece of their business to a lot of times individuals or companies that are really not equipped to give them the service that they need. Or if I ask them questions like, what is it about, what does that IT service provider provide you? Often they just want somebody to break fix, somebody I can call when there's an issue. The thing is, if and I know you guys can appreciate this, oftentimes if there's a security breach, that the bad guys aren't announcing that they're there. Typically an intruder coming in isn't trying to make their presence known. So oftentimes small companies and medium-sized companies are being hacked and important data being sucked away because no one's really watching proactively. So that whole proactive management is really an issue. The other thing is when we talk about, break fix versus proactive management, I'll hear from the company owner, I don't see any value in paying that money out every month. I don't know what I'm getting every month. And I'd rather just call, if I have an issue, I call. Now take the conversation from the managed service provider, from the company owner to the managed service provider. Here's what the managed service provider says. If my customer has a service and it's an ongoing service every month, there's a fee associated with it. And for that fee, we do this, we do this, we do this, we do this. And a lot of the things that are, break fix are part of that monthly service. But because they don't want to, oh, and by the way, they also get a, pretty nice rate, hourly rate if we have to go in and take care of things. But if they don't do the monthly fix, now when there is an urgent call, and that company is now they're having an impact with the outage, now I'm going to charge them the top rate because now they want me to jump through hoops. I got to be there yesterday. I got to get there within the hour. We got a rush order equipment, so I charge them the absolute most. And if I ask, well, how much does a typical outage cost, or what are the costs involved, and you actually add it up, it ends up being more in a break fix model oftentimes than proactively maintaining a good, secure, and healthy infrastructure. So I think that's one of the things I really want to make sure gets stressed. The other thing that I'm seeing is that the small and medium-sized businesses are severely underserved by these drive-by MSPs, meaning we'll do the break fix, we'll help you out here and there as we can. But what I'm finding is the tools that the MSPs are using, a lot of them, let me just pause here. Let me share this point in a story. So I'm an IT guy. I've worked for a company. I'm in an IT department. I've been in a break fix mode for quite a while. I get really frustrated with my boss. I got frustrated with the hours. I got frustrated with the holidays, all this stuff. I think I'm going to start my own business. And I'm really good with Windows administration and setting up firewalls and all this stuff. So I decide I can be as good an MSP as the next guy. That's the MSP that I talk about as the drive-by, and I hope I don't offend anybody, please. The drive-by or the single shingle MSP. They don't have structure set up. They don't have processes defined. They don't have service levels defined. They're just I'm good at IT, so I'm going to go be it for my customer. And then they purchase tools from SolarWinds or ConnectWise or the different vendors out there that provide some really good tools, and they don't understand how the tools work. So they give their client the bare minimum that they can handle. We've got, I know one MSP we came across just recently. He's a one-man show. He's got 300 clients. He's managing over 3,000 nodes, and he's one guy. So you got to imagine, to be able to handle that kind of a business and that kind of volume means give them the bare minimum that I can handle, not necessarily what they need. So I hope you kind of see where I'm going. So many times there's a real difference when I ask about, oh, you know what, I've got so-and-so, he's monitoring my network, he's monitoring my environment. That means something very different to the MSP than it does the end client. So a lot of the discussion we're having here about asking the right questions is to get to the heart of, make sure that we're on the same page here. The MSPs really do need, or the SMBs, the small, medium-sized businesses, they really do need the same kind of proactive and continuous monitoring, continuous improvement mindset as the larger companies. They just need to scale down what it is the large are doing, and because business is business, and we all have network devices, we all have laptops or desktops, and there's probably a server involved somewhere. There's applications we're using to run our business. It's just they don't need necessarily the volume or the width. Many times the SMBs lack the breadth of skill set on their staff, if they have a staff, or within the single MSP, especially if it is a single shingle or an individual. Let me just pause here. I went through a lot, but this was to kind of set the table of why this is an important topic, and I'd like to get some of your thoughts on, what are you seeing in your environment, or what do you think about some of the points that we've made here?
Yeah, so don't be afraid to take yourself off mute and just kind of share where you're at in this process. I know several people completed that survey that asked some questions just kind of about, preparation for hiring an MSP or reevaluating an MSP. And there were a couple different answers. It seemed like some people did have the staff that they needed. Some people weren't sure. So if anybody wants to share their experience there, kind of where you're starting from.
I think I'll go ahead. So we have a managed service provider, and I don't think it's quite like single shingle or drive-by. We have a contract. They come every week to check on our servers, but I think the frustration that my boss and I have is that they're not very proactive about suggesting changes, and they're very their customer service skills are lacking. I mean, a side note, but they don't really suggest changes that will prevent those issues down the line. So they're just looking for those constant break and fix, I think is what you call it.
Right. Exactly. Was that Justin by chance?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, and so the thing that Justin said that was good. He said we have a contract. I can't tell you how many times the contract is a handshake, or I'll ask the client, well, do you know specifically what it is the MSP is providing? I get an invoice every month, I pay it. If I have an issue, I call them. That it's kind of that kind of thing. And there's the contract is lacking, the expectations haven't been set. So Justin, kudos to you guys for having a contract. And the fact that they show up on a regular monthly basis is also a good thing. Many times, I'll hear from the client, we don't see them unless we have a problem, call them in. So, and a couple of the things you brought up, you're going to see later on in the slide deck, but I'd like to hear from anyone else. I just want to make sure this doesn't turn into a one-way presentation and more of a dialogue.
Sure, I'll go. This is Sheila Schmidt, and we had, I would say, probably a drive-by kind of break-fix guy, if you will, that we would call, and we laugh a lot because we'd ask him, I can research and figure out how to do something, but I don't have time for that. So a lot of times we'd call him and we'd, kind of come in and assess status, and he'd be sitting there Googling how to fix something. And so we actually just, in the past couple of weeks, we did a bunch of research. We looked at, we had got 3 different bids. We signed a contract, and we're actually implementing that tomorrow. So they're coming in tomorrow and Friday to implement our managed services solution. So this webcast was just interesting timing, and I decided I'm sure I can get something that I need to, be thinking of as I'm working towards managing them. But it's just, we finally were like, we need to take. I think you're exactly right that the cost to be preventive and proactive is going to be ultimately far less than not only the cost to provide break fix in an emergency basis, but I think everyone also needs to consider, the downtime if you do have an outage, as well as the risk to just not having a secure environment or an environment that you can really feel good about telling your clients that you protect their information and you take it seriously. So those are some of the considerations that we took into account.
Right. Perfect. So you said, you made me smile. You said the timing was interesting, because I'm thinking, yeah, the timing of this would have been good like 2 months ago to give you more information, but it certainly will give you some insight or some questions maybe to ask down a bit.
Yeah.
So
thank you.
But I did like that I heard you sent out bids. That's pretty key. So kudos there. Anyone else have some thoughts before we hit the next piece?
I think we can move on, Mike.
Okay. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but too many times, and when I say too many, I'm going to say at least 80% of the time, the SMB, if it's not a, formal company is kind of a loose term, but if it's not somebody who's, giving you full life cycle, full coverage as an MSP, a lot of times security is just, security to me, being a cybersecurity, company, cybersecurity for me means, something different. For a lot of the MSPs, cybersecurity means we're putting on antivirus and you've got a firewall. And maybe there's some more stuff, a little bit here, a little bit there, but oftentimes when we talk about security within the SMB market or with some of the MSPs, we do security. Yep, we do security. We put in antivirus. We make sure that there's a firewall, and we check certain logs, periodically, whatnot. Cybersecurity is far more than that. So my encouragement to you is make sure if you're in that small, medium-sized business category, that cybersecurity is really something that gets discussed with your service provider. And here are they're kind of scary facts. 43% of cyber attacks target small businesses. Most of the small business mindset is, what do they want with us? Well, we're a small business. We don't have any real assets. And they always think it's the big guys you hear about because it makes the news and all of that stuff. But I'm going to give you 2 examples of things that I know you've heard over the last 8 years, 6 years. How many times have you heard we're going to rebuild the economy on the backs of small businesses? You can answer if you want, but if not, it's okay. I've heard it constantly. We're going to rebuild the economy on the backs of small businesses. How many of you realize that countries out there that want to hurt us but would never take us on militarily have heard the same thing? And that's why there's such a focus on small businesses and impacting small businesses. The other scary fact is 60% of small businesses, once they've gone through a cyber attack, will be out of business within 6 months. And I'm not talking about the email spam kind of thing where I get your email and I send out stupid things or whatever, but a real intrusion that has impacted your business. Many times, small businesses won't be around within the year because of the impact that had. 55% of this survey said their companies had a cyber attack in the last 12 months, and scarily 50% involved breach of customer data. And we all know that once your customer data has been breached, they tend to go look for other service providers or other companies that are more secure to do business with. So those are just some things to be aware of. So first things first. If we're thinking about going with a managed IT service provider, we need to really ask ourselves some questions. And so some of the questions were in the survey, and so I'll run through these fairly quickly, but I do want your thoughts on these. So first question, am I big enough to support an MSP service provider? Am I big enough to support? So if I'm a company that's making, $50,000, and the service provider is going to cost me, let's just say $1,000 a month. I'll just use it for round numbers. It's that number is way too big for my monthly budget to be able to provide that. And so I'm probably not going to be able to entice an MSP to take me on as a client. That would be very rare. And probably in that scenario, it would be the neighbor's kid down the street, and or the nephew or something that could just do some break fix stuff for you periodically. But it's important that you realize that if you're going to go with an MSP model beyond break fix, there's going to be a monthly fee. Sheila, you were telling us about what you were doing, right? I want to just give an example to that. Just give me a sense of the number of servers, desktops, and people in your organization.
Sure. So we have We have 8 employees. We only need one server, but we're not super data heavy at all. We're, you know, we're healthcare, so we're pretty rooted in like, we still have fax machines and stuff like that. But literally the first few bids, 4 companies I talked to were $1,000, like a month, zero flexibility. And we were able to get that down quite a bit to less than $600 a month. Okay.
It's funny because I've got a number that we've just done recently, and they were right in that $600 to $800 a month, roughly the same size. Some 8, some 12, some 15. So think of it this way. So that number's probably accurate. So for that size company, saying at a minimum 500 a month is probably pretty reasonable. Can I afford 6,000 a year to make sure that my server stays up, my laptops stay patched, I have updated antivirus, that if something goes wrong, somebody's going to be there, that I have somebody I can call for help, that I know that I'm going to just assume my Office 365 has been set up, and oh, by the way, I'm in healthcare, so that they've got some understanding of HIPAA requirements and they're following those guidelines. So if I'm audited, I've got someone that's going to help me through it. So if you think about that 6,000 a year, and I'm gonna up that number if it's okay with you, Sheila. I'm gonna make it 12,000 or 1,000 a month, 12,000 a year. You okay with that?
Yep.
Okay, cool. 1,000 a month. That seems like such a big number, and I know the 6,000 for a year already sounded, but 12,000 a month. If I have an outage that is going to require 40 hours at a rate of I don't know, I'll go low. We'll say 150 an hour. So 6,000 a week. If I have an outage, or I have some project that needs to be done, or something that needs to be done that's going to be paying a consultant 40 hours, I've just spent $6,000. And by the way, the 150 is probably a standard rate. But if you didn't have the MSP service, most of the guys I know are going to be charging $200 a month. Now, I'm sitting in New Jersey, so the rates may be different, but it's very common to be at 175 or 200 if it's outside of the monthly service. So in 1 week, 40 hours, I've already spent $5,000 or $6,000. And if I have 2 outages, what if I have one a quarter? What if I have one situation a quarter that requires 40 hours of professional services? I've already blown away that 1,000 a month. So looking at let's just for round numbers, 500 a month, 6,000 a year. When you look at it that way, number one is you're big enough. If you can afford the 500 a month, you're big enough to support that MSP. And when you look at all the things that should be included in that service, it's probably far more than you would get if you paid an hourly rate to get those same things done. So that's kind of how you got to look at it, because oftentimes, and I hear this from the service providers often, and from the customer, I don't want to pay for that regularly. I don't want to pay for that every month. But when I want them, I want them. And when I have a need, I have a need. And then if you look at what they've paid over time at a higher rate, oftentimes, I said it earlier, oftentimes the monthly service gives you more, gives you tracking, gives you things that you would never ask for. Like, for instance, Sheila, I'm sure you asked for inventory to make sure that anything that they're providing for you, that they're provisioning for you, that they've tracked it and they can provide that information. Where if you were doing a buy as you need or pay as you go, they would probably never do that for you because it's not part of the service. So kind of weighing what do we get and what don't we get. The other side of it is, am I small enough to need an MSP? In other words, I've got a client that they're a $200 million retailer, and they've got 4 people on their staff. Am I small enough to need an MSP provider? When you're a large company and you have a staff of 15 or 20 or 300, you probably don't need an MSP. And in the case of this $200 million company, they're actually saying, we have so many projects going on and our resources get so swamped in the day-to-day that I would rather have the MSP do the day-to-day so that we can work on the projects that we have. And by the way, there's no right or wrong answers to these, right? It's your situation. Like I don't have an answer. What's too big or what's too small? It's what are you as an organization trying to accomplish, and how does it fit that MSP model, right? Do I have the talent on staff? Does my staff have the necessary skills? So I had one manufacturer that we do business with, and he has 2 IT resources. He says, I don't need this stuff. And we were talking about not only the management of the infrastructure, but also security. I don't need this stuff. I've got 2 on staff. I said, well, tell me a little bit about the 2 folks that you have on staff. What's their skill set? One was a database resource and one was a programmer. And to talk to them, they knew very little about, they knew very little about security, very, very little about proactive management, knew a lot about, so everything, you ever hear that saying, if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. For the database guy, everything was a database. For the programmer, everything could be solved through programming. And so you got to look at what are the skill sets that your staff has, and can they have it? Can they manage it? And then if not, how do I align the skill sets I have so I'm not paying for things I don't need with the skills of the MSP service provider? Important to know what your domain looks like, that you have budget allocated, and that your requirements have been clearly defined. And oftentimes too, when you're talking about a managed service provider, they want to know what they're managing. What are the management targets? What is it that we're providing? Okay, and of course, you always want to have that liaison. Who on my team is going to be the liaison with the service provider? So I know that communication is happening on a regular basis. We know what's going on. We're aware. Let me pause here and get your feedback on some of these questions. And your thoughts around, do you find yourself asking these same kinds of questions?
Well, I think we're definitely maybe at a point where we could probably just afford our own on-talent staff. We don't have any IT support on staff, but we have like 190 employees. I think it's not really up to me whether or not we would hire IT staff, but we just need that extra step in the service provider, and that might make the difference with our current situation. It's just more proactivity.
Right. And Justin, what I would say there is, if you've got 190 employees and you currently have no IT staff, did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, our administrators take on a lot of the IT roles. We just make it work, and we have this managed service provider that fills in for when we don't know. Right.
So, offsetting or letting the managed service provider provide what they're doing while you slowly build up a staff. If you deem it would be worthwhile doing that, you still may be in a scenario where, when you look at the cost involved, 190 people, you're probably looking at maybe 3,000 to 4,000, maybe even 5,000 a month for a managed service provider, if they're handling all the desktops, all the calls, all the break fix, the monitoring, the endpoint protection, those kinds of things. But even there, with a company of 190 people, even 5,000 a month, now you're looking at 60,000 a year. That's still, if you brought on one IT resource at 100 or 120,000 a year, and then you look at their fully burdened costs would probably be more like 180,000. You still have plenty of room, right? Even if it was 10,000 a month at 120,000. But if you brought on that $120,000 resource, single resource, they probably have a skill set in 2, 3, once you get beyond 3 or 4 skill set areas where they're strong, then it tapers off very quickly. Right. So it's a rare individual that can cover, 10 or 12 different areas thoroughly and successfully. So when you look at an IT service provider, if you look at it as what would that fully burdened cost of that resource be for a year, and what is it costing what is it costing for the MSP service provider, and the breadth, because you need to go with a bigger service provider, the breadth of skill sets that they have, you can kind of see the value of going that route. Does that make sense?
For sure. And I know I said 190, but most of those employees are direct support staff, so they're not really needing the IT support. I think realistically, we have, I don't know, probably close to 75 to 100 that are using computers all the time, using our server and all that. But the rest of them, I would say maybe a majority of them aren't all the time on our servers and stuff like that. And I think, don't quote me on this, but I'm almost certain we only pay $6,000 a year for this contract, which is, I think it's pretty decent for what we get right now, but that's why we're looking. We're looking for something to take it to the next step.
Right. Gotcha. Cool. Any other feedbacks or comment before I move on? And Justin, if you'd like to talk further offline, I'm happy to have further conversation with you. It sounds like you have an interesting one coming up. Okay, we talked about first things first. First things is just recognizing, where an MSP service provider would fit in our model, our program. And I better pick up the pace because I'm way behind. So the first thing is just making sure, are we a good fit? Second is preparing yourself for the conversation, right? So I just went through a scenario where it's actually helping a couple of different companies identify and choose their IT service provider. And they went through the process and they were really confused about things like, how come I've got 3 bids and they're like, they're not even close. They're all over the map. And I said, well, show me your requirements. And so the requirements were, we have this number of laptops, we have this number of desktops, this number of servers, these are the applications, and you get the idea. The requirements were not a list of requirements at all. They were what the target environment was. And it was very simple. And so depending on the interpretation of any of the service providers, they quoted and provided a proposal based on what they thought the customer needed. So clearly requirements were defined. So the most important thing starting off is defining your requirements. For the managed service provider, what are the requirements? And these, what I have up on the screen here are not the requirements. These are the areas you need to define the requirements. So you need to define requirements around asset management or inventory control. What do you want that service provider to do for you? Do you want them just to know this is the server make model, do you want them to know configuration information? Here's the server, here's the disk space of the server, here's the memory in the server. Do you want them to know about the, we start to now get into, ITIL-based configuration management when we start getting further with, what's running on that server, what applications are on the server, what databases does it support, what's the function in the organization. So you need to really take your assets and say, what am I looking for the service provider to do for my asset tracking? And then is that managed service provider going to also resell hardware and software as well as provision? So if I need I have a new employee starting, I need a laptop. Are you going to buy the laptop and then they're going to set it up for you, or are they going to provide the laptop with it set up? So you want to make those kinds of decisions. What kind of proactive management are you looking for? So let me pause here, and it'll come up a couple of times, but I just want to make this distinction. From a terminology standpoint, management or monitoring are used interchangeably far too often. And so if I ask the customer, are they managing the environment? And they say yes. And then we find out all they're really doing is monitoring up, down. Management is 2 components. Management is the monitoring of the environment and the controlling. And so what that means is if I need to make a change automatically or based on some event happening, I can automatically remediate that issue. Proactive management is made up of 2 components, the monitoring and the controlling. So it's up to you to communicate to your service provider, what are you looking for them to do? If it's just monitoring, typically they're monitoring and they'll let you know if there's an issue or whatnot. If they're managing, if there's an issue, they'll remediate as well. So just, make sure. And then from an O&M standpoint, what are you looking from an operations, a day-to-day operations and maintenance standpoint? What are your requirements around patching and software upgrades? around antivirus and malware protection? What are your requirements around backup and recovery? Local backup, offsite backup, backup deltas every day, full backup every month, monthly backup offsite. What are your requirements? And when I typically ask, and you'll see this come up again, when I typically ask about, are you validating the backup and recovery? And I hope somebody takes a note here because this is a gem. Are you validating the backup and recovery? Here's what I hear. When we back up, we validate that the backup took place. So we can tell you, yes, the backup has taken place. That is not what I'm talking about. Validate backup and recovery is all about the recovery. It has nothing to do with the backup. Backup and recovery, the reason you do a backup is so that you can recover when you need to. And so what I look for is an MSP that's going to validate the recovery, meaning once a quarter, twice a year, validate that if I needed to restore this backup, it will restore. That's backup and recovery, recovering validating the recovery. And the reason that's so important is you don't want to find out that you can't recover in the height of an issue, in the height of a problem, and you're trying to recover your business. So you want to do that when things are working and things are good. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm hoping you can tell from the tone of my voice, I feel very passionate about that. Your help desk and your support requests, what are your requirements around that? What are your requirements around training? Requirements around the move, add, change, delete requests. You want to define your requirements. If you're in a highly transactional business and downtime really costs a lot of money, you want to know what your incident response time requirements are, your turnaround and response times are going to be based on a request coming in. Requirements around access control and authentication, and then documentation and best practices. So we heard Sheila saying about in the health industry, and HIPAA is important. So what's the documentation for best practices around doing IT? So that could be COBOL, COBIT, it could be ITIL, it could be Microsoft Operations Framework, MOF, and then any compliance items that need to be taken care of, like HIPAA or NIST standards for small business compliance or even government compliance. So you want to talk about those things internally and make sure you define your requirements in those areas. And then the other thing that's really important is define the management domain. What are the things that are going to be managed by this MSP? And the one, the easy ones and the quick ones, my servers, desktops, laptops. Well, what about your mobile devices? What about phones and tablets? What about printers and monitors and other peripherals? And your network components are your firewalls, your load balancers, and other items that help with the network. When we talk about the web servers, everybody's got that one down. We got to have our web server monitored, but also what about our web services? Oftentimes these two terms are used interchangeably. The web server is the physical server that the web services are running on. So you want to make sure that both are being managed and monitored for security as well as availability and performance. And of course, email and storage and any cloud-based applications. But other things that you want to be able to define, what about your collaboration tools? If you're using SharePoint or Dropbox or other collaboration tools or applications that you're using, different locations. If you've got IT components in your warehouse is a location that needs to be managed. So it's taking that into account. Business applications, databases, and then of course end users, their roles and responsibilities have to be part of the definition. And what I just laid out for you is a really important aspect. And if you're familiar with ITIL, this is right out of ITIL, that your solution, your management domain, and your solution has to be based on the people, the processes, and the technology. All of those make up your management domain. Any questions or thoughts at this point?
Nope.
Laura Lee, I'm not seeing facial because of the slides. Am I losing anybody? Are we good?
No, we're okay to keep going.
Okay, good. Good. All right. So what have we done? We did first things first. We figured out, are we a good fit? Are we not a good fit? And then in preparation for starting to talk with our MSPs, now we want to make sure that we're asking the right questions. So my apologies in advance. When Laura Lee and I were talking about this, we decided, the 10 questions you should ask your MSP. And Laura Lee, if you remember with that email, I said, here are the questions, but I may change them. Mm-hmm. Sorry, everybody. So what I did is I said, we could, from a real, really cool, snazzy, marketing, whatever, 10 questions would be great. But, I said, what's the value that I could give all of you for attending today? And one would be to give you a good set of questions that you can ask. So if you're going through this, here are some questions that would be really helpful as you're starting to talk with your MSP. So the first grouping of questions are really focused on the staff and the tools. These are questions that often are not asked. And if you have asked them, kudos, thumbs up to all of you. But these are things that you do want to know. And of course, this is not an exhaustive list, but this will be a good start. Number one is, what's the size of your technical staff? And tell me about their areas of expertise. And if, you're getting a response, we're a team of 1 or 2, or I was just on a call. We started a cybersecurity assessment for a client just on Monday. And it was 3 individuals, and they haven't documented anything. They haven't really, I probably shouldn't go into much detail there, but nice guys, take really good care of their customer, but have documented nothing. And, well, this one knows, well, it's in his head, and it's, that's kind of scary, but making sure you know what the size of their technical staff is and what expertise are they bringing to the table? What are the levels of certification do they have in different areas? So it might be the management tools. Let's say they're using HP tools. Are they certified in the HP tools? Let's say they're using SolarWinds tools. Are they certified in SolarWinds? Let's say they're using the Sophos tools. Do they have the certifications? In other words, do they know those tools really well? And what, as an MSP service provider, what do you do to further develop your resources in these technology areas? Because we all know technology changes, rapidly. So it's important to know that the MSP service provider has plans in place for developing their resources and strengthening their technical chops. Ask them about their staffing levels. If you're an organization that needs 24/7 by 365, or you just need 8 by 5 by, I said 52 because you need more than 40 hours a week, more like 12 hours a day kind of thing. But are they staffed to handle not only you, but their other customers and their requirements? Where's their staff located? And I don't want to be politically incorrect in any way, but let's face it, we've all called IT staff and tried to get help with things, and the person we're talking to, we can barely understand them. So I think it's a fair question to ask, where's the staff located and what's their primary language? Or even, are they going to understand me when I'm talking? Am I going to be able to understand them? Because that can be very frustrating. The level of proactive monitoring or management, and remember, I said there's a difference between monitoring and management. You want to get to that. So what level of proactive monitoring or management are you providing? And get right down to the metrics. I mean, when I help a client put an RFP together, I want to know what metrics they're looking at, because if I say to the client, are they managing your environment? And they say yes. And I say, what are they looking at? And they say, I don't know. I don't know what they're looking at. They could be looking at, out of the box, 5 different metrics, or they could be looking at 50 or 500. It's important for you to know what is it that they're going to get, because when you have an issue and they don't see it and they don't find it, you're going to be frustrated. You're going to say, wait a minute, you told me you were managing my environment. You were monitoring my environment. They're going to say, we are, but we weren't looking at that. So it's really important to understand what are the metrics. And if the metrics are not thoroughly covering your environment, you want to make sure that they do. So if I have a payroll application and it's running out of database, and that database sits on a server, and that server talks to the database through a network, if I'm leaving any one of those out, if I'm monitoring the server up down and I'm monitoring the network up down, but something happens within my database table, as far as I'm concerned, the MSP, things are good. As far as I'm a client, I can't do business. There's frustration that develops, so you want to know. What tools are they using for management? And I categorize my proactive management into 3 key areas. Availability. Are you available? Performance and event management. When an event happens, what do you do with that event? How do you manage it? What tools are being used for backup and recovery? How do you validate the recovery process? What tools are you using for security monitoring? And tell me about your incident response plan. When there's an incident, by definition, an incident is anything that is or could have an impact on my business. What's the response plan on an incident? And then are you following any kind of industry best standards? I mentioned before, ITIL, COBIT, MOF would be the 3 primary ones. And then, what kind of help desk support and tracking are you providing me? Any thoughts on these questions?
Yeah, I also just want to do a quick time check, Mike, because we have just a few minutes left here. But I wonder if you can maybe identify some common pitfalls. Like, in your experience, have you seen that there are any of these questions that are most often overlooked?
Actually, most of these questions are overlooked.
Okay.
Yeah, surprisingly enough, the ones that are asked are, maybe not the tools, but the capabilities. So for instance, backup and recovery. Okay, they provide backup and recovery. That's good. But they don't necessarily get to the tools too much. And the reason that's important is some tools out there will back up the email server, but not the email content. Well, you probably want to know that. Or some of the backup tools, and I don't want to promote vendors on this call, but some tools out there that MSPs use, not only will they do the backup for multiple servers, but if one of the servers goes down, that backup device will actually take over that server function until the server can come back up. Other tools can't do that. So that's why I try to get to what tools are being used so that I can help guide our clients with what capability they can expect from backup and recovery in this case.
Yeah, great. So I just want to check in too with the folks on the line in these last couple of minutes if there are questions that we want to make sure that we get to. If you came to the call with any questions, again, about your specific situation, while you have this expertise on the line, just want to check in with you guys.
I don't have any specific questions, but I definitely appreciate you creating this list of questions to ask, because I think that is going to be very, very, very helpful in figuring out whether or not our current provider is going to be is going to continue being our current provider, or if we need to, start looking elsewhere, getting different bids on stuff. I think this has been very, very helpful. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. Well, we're going to run out of time quickly, and we can get these slides to you. So let me just run through these really quick so that I know that I covered them. First set of questions were on the staff and the tools. Second set of questions more on the performance of the service provider. Far too many times there's no agreed upon level of service. They don't, especially in the smaller environments, they don't want to kind of be held accountable. And I don't say that in a mean way. It's just not common for them. So as if I purchase a car, I kind of want to have an expectation of how that car is going to perform. So I think that's an important discussion to have. What's the accepted level of service? What's my expectation and your expectation? And then, by the way, if that expectation is not being met, is there any recourse I have? Do I pay something less per month? What does it mean if we're not meeting that acceptable level? And then what kind of reporting are you going to provide? So many times, I don't know about you guys, but I ask my clients, are you getting a monthly report with the invoice of what was done, what they found, what they saw? For the most part, they're not getting a monthly report. So I would ask you, when you send your invoice, send me a report of the activity for the month. I had one service provider say, I don't provide a monthly report because the tools are so robust, they give me all sorts of information I don't think the client needs. Well, tell me about the information. Well, there's these critical events. I'm thinking, if there's critical events, as a client, I think I want to know about it. And then there's all these error messages I don't think they need to see. And I'm like, I would want to know about errors because that kind of helps me tune the system, right? That additional continuous service improvement means tuning my system so that I'm not getting those kinds of messages. So I encourage you to ask for reports. What O&M activities are going to be performed? Set my expectation weekly, monthly, quarterly, yearly. What are the expectations for the ongoing O&M? And Sheila, I think you mentioned this, maybe different terminology, but what's the expectation for continued service improvement? If you've been my service provider for a year, I should see better service in year 2 than I did in year 1. And I should see better service in year 3 than I did in year 2, because you are working with me to continually improve my environment. How are you maintaining visibility into the latest security threats? So if you're providing monitoring and management of my security posture as well, I want to know that you're staying up on that, because that's changing drastically. And what's the response plan to a security breach? And what about if you find things in my infrastructure that you think I should be doing differently or better, how are you going to identify them and propose improvements? Are you a hardware, software reseller? Again, is that a transaction, or are you value-added reseller? And then don't be afraid to ask for and follow up with references. That's really critical. And lastly, this is the big one. Mostly the questions are around what's the monthly fee? What's the initial setup? That tends to be the bulk of it, but here are some other questions. Not only the monthly fee, but when I add devices or users, what does it cost me? What's the delta cost? I want to be able to understand, I know what that initial setup fee is. If you have an hourly rate, what is it? If you have to come, if it's above and beyond, and what constitutes above and beyond the monthly fee? And what's your remote rate versus your on-site rate? I'm a firm believer the remote rate should be lower than the on-site, because they didn't have to travel to get there. They're in their own environment. They can wear their bunny slippers and they don't have to worry about putting a tie on. What's the difference between your on-site and your remote rate? And what about your rate on after hours? You know, typically your after hours are defined as, you know, before 7 a.m. and after 6 p.m. What are your after hours, weekend, and holiday rate? And if I ask for a 4-hour turnaround, or what if I need a 24-hour turnaround? What are you going to charge me when I need that? And often a surprise rate is the travel time rate. If the MSP has to travel to your site, they maybe give you a discounted hourly rate. I would tell you the first thing you want to do is negotiate that away, you know. And then what's the net terms on the invoice? I see a lot of due on receipt. Maybe you want to negotiate your net terms, push it out a little bit. And then, if you are a reseller, what kind of, if I sign up with you as a MSP and you are a reseller, what expectation would I have for a discount for hardware or software? Folks, I'm clear out of time, but I really hope that this was useful for you. If I can just do a 30-second introduction of Solutions Cube. We are an IT service management company providing our clients management of infrastructure, servers, databases, applications, network devices. We do cybersecurity and business service management. We help folks like you, get the job done in a number of different ways. And if I can just leave you with these closing thoughts, if you got anything out of this, here's what I hope you got. Make sure that you assess your current situation to determine, are you a good fit or not for an MSP? Define your requirements, define your management domain, ask lots and lots of questions, and make sure you fully understand the cost model. And Sheila, I like that you said you put it out to bids, and that's how I'm finishing. Make it competitive. Once you define this stuff, send out an RFP. Once you have your RFP, your responses, categorize them. I put it all on a spreadsheet. I categorize it, and then I go back and I start to, on behalf of my clients, negotiate better rates for them. Once you receive the bid, it's okay to go back and say, we need you to come down. We like what you're providing, but we need you to come down. It's okay to negotiate afterwards.
Thank you so much. Yeah, really appreciate this, Mike. And I'll share the slides with the folks on the line, and we'll also post the recording on iConnect. But I think that this has been wonderful. I really appreciate your time.
Awesome. I know everybody has to run, but could I just get just a couple of, I'm a real shy and insecure guy. Can I just get a couple of maybe some feedback on what you thought of the
so we'll send a quick survey out after to people who attended. So I'll share that with you. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you very much. Again, I appreciate all that you gave me. I'm looking forward to having that PowerPoint slide as an additional resource. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Justin.
All right. Take care, everyone. Thank you.